Hello, grade 8 math. This is unit 7. It's 7.1 decimal 5, I'm going to call it. You can find similar things on page 391 and to 393. It's basically about using spreadsheets for graphs. Sometimes drawing graphs can become difficult or not difficult, but tedious. They take a long time and it's something that you've done over and over. So sometimes it's good for you to be able to use a spreadsheet to graph. I've done this often. At university I did it a whole lot, and high school near the end I started doing it. Being able to draw a graph is important too, because it really helps you understand how graphs are actually put together rather than just trusting it. Because if you don't know how they're supposed to be put together, when you use a graphing software, you'll just like make the graph and be like, oh, that's it. And yet sometimes the software doesn't quite work because you haven't actually filled it in properly. So let's look at this. I'm going to use something here called Google Sheets. I like to use it. It makes it so I can access the graphs at home and at school. So how this works is you have some columns and they're labeled with letters, and you have some rows and they're labeled with numbers. And let's say you have some data. Maybe it's grades on test. Let's say there's a bunch with A's, B's. I just realized my buttons that I was using there that pause and reset sometimes happen. So essentially, you just make sure that beside A is the number of students who got A, beside B is the number of students who got B, C, D, and F. It doesn't matter really what your data presents on this graph. Like, it doesn't really matter what type of data you have. You'd follow the same principle. Whatever you want on the bottom of your graph, you're going to have in this left column, so your x-axis labels. And then the numbers, the responding sort of thing, will be the y-axis. Now, just click somewhere over here, and you're going to go up to the top to Insert and press Chart. I like doing it this way. It's not necessarily the fastest way, but you're going to get the graph to look how you want it. Now, what you're going to do is this opens up, and I'm going to zoom out. All right, and you're going to get something that pops up like this. And on the side, there's usually a toolbar kind of thing that pops up. If it's not there, just double click on your graph, and voila. Now what you're going to do is you're going to leave it in column chart. I like to leave it here no matter what type of graph I'm doing. And first thing you do is you click down here on your x-axis. You click there and it says to select data range. Well, what you do, your x-axis is going to be your first column. You're just going to click on the first title there and drag it to your last one. And you're going to press OK. Then you're going to scroll down, and it says series here. You're going to press add series. And you're going to do the same thing, but with your second column. Okay. And to move this over, you can just move this over. And voila. It's a basic graph. It has how many students on the left, and it has the grades. What if you want to do something maybe a little different than this? Maybe you want to show this as a different type of graph. Well, on the right, there's Customize, which you can make this look differently, and there's Setup. If you go to Setup, that's where you're going to be able to choose your type of graph. So you can choose smooth line, straight line. You could choose a bar graph, column chart. You could choose a pie graph. Okay? So depending what type you want, I'm going to go back here because you can also do other types of graphs. There's sidebar where it goes to the side. Oops, not stacked. I didn't mean to do that. I went to go that. You can also do vertical column. What if maybe you have multiple tests? So number of students on first test that got each. Maybe you want to do this again and change a few of these. This is arbitrary data. It's not the same. Maybe less got on that one. Maybe this was a 3, this was a 4, and still one failed. What if you wanted to make this a double bar graph? Well, if you go back into Setup, you scroll down to Series, there's your first set of series, which is this column B. you can add a second series. Click there and click on this, and this is going to make it so you can select your range. And voila, now you've got 2 series. What if you want more series? What if you want to go back? Maybe since maybe there's a test that's really easy and now it becomes 9, 5, 4, 4, and 0. No one failed that test. Maybe that's what happens, and you want to add that to the graph. Well, just go back to Setup, Add Series, click here on Select Data Range, and you're going to click and drag. Okay, voila, now you've got 3. So your first test is the blue columns, your second test is the red ones, the red columns, and then finally you've got your third column, which there's 0 who got F. That's why the yellow isn't there on there. Now there is a faster way to do this, but sometimes it doesn't work. You can actually just click and drag, make sure you have titles here, all of that, and go Insert and Chart. And sometimes it makes exactly the same chart we just did. But other times the data doesn't seem to line up quite as well. I'm not going to go into too many details as to what happens. But depending the type of graph you want, it sometimes just doesn't line up. Like sometimes it'll put on your titles. Oop, but I spelt it wrong. Sometimes it puts the titles there. And it puts them in weird spots, right? Number of students is the title of my graph, and yet that's probably not what I would want. I have a feeling there's a way that maybe I put another row above in the spreadsheet. Not quite sure. But now that you have this graph, I'm going to go back to the other one. Maybe you're going to want to customize this graph so that it looks nice, right? It's missing some things. It's missing your axis titles. It's missing maybe more specification of what tests these were. It doesn't have a title for the graph to explain it. That's when you go into your Customize. You can also go into Customize to change your range. Now, a lot of the things in here you can actually double click on. So this range on the side, if you double click, it'll take you to the vertical axes. And then when you scroll down, you could change this so that the minimum is actually 1 and maybe the maximum is 9. And then that changes the graph how it looks. Or maybe you want to make it look like they didn't do so well, and maybe you make the maximum 100. Wow, they did terrible on this test. Who knows how you want to show this. It appears like they did terrible, and yet the data is actually the exact same. It's A's and whatnot. But you can change it. The bottom here you could double click on, and you can change the range if it's numerical. This one doesn't have numbers, so that's why it doesn't show up there, but you can change it that way. You can go to chart style, and you can maybe change the colors of the background. You can change the grid lines. You can double click on those, and you can choose the type of grid lines you have. I keep closing that. Let me click on those again. Double click. You can add in minor grid lines. You can add in the axis on the side. They call them ticks. You can put in minor ticks in between. So there's a whole lot of different things you can throw in. You can change the color so that those are longer. You can change the colors of these bars. Double clicking on the titles, you can change what these are just by double clicking. And then over here, this will change what the words are. If you want to give it a title, you just go Customize, Chart and Axis Titles, and right here, whatever you type is going to show up as your title. So, grades on Math 8 tests. And then you might want to change this to Unit Test 1. This would be Unit Test 2. Unit Test 3. All right. How do you add your axes? Horizontal is this bottom one. We probably want to add a title to it. Well, it's still under Chart and Axes Titles. Now this is the tricky thing in here. Under here, there's chart title. You're going to do horizontal axis title, and then what you type here is marks, or grades, I think we're calling them on this, on tests. Okay, and then you change this to vertical axes. That'll leave here. It'll be number of students. And it'll fill that in, and now this graph's looking a lot nicer. I just need to learn how to spell tests, apparently. Just kidding. But seriously. But just kidding. No, I'm serious. There we've got a graph, and it represents this data pretty well. I found an example here. I took that exact same data that was in my charts here, which now it's completely messed it up because I changed the type of graph. Maybe I'll undo. All right, I took this graph and I went to setup and I went to circle graph or pie chart. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, wow, cool, yeah, awesome, it did it for me. But it didn't really. In fact, this that's being shown here is actually only showing the column B, I think. Because if I switch this to being one of the other columns, it actually changes the amounts. Right? This one here would be column D. Why do I know? Because there's no F in the circle. This one. Pie charts aren't going to be able to show multiple tests together. They could do the averages of those tests and do it, but it's not going to be able to show them individually. So that's a disadvantage of a pie chart right there. That's all I want to go over today. All you do, type in what you want to be on the bottom of your graphs. So the possible grades on tests is what I had down here. So that's my first column. Second column is what my first set of data is going to be in correspondence with those. Then if I have, maybe I want to do multiple, I do more and more columns. And if you're doing bar graphs, usually you can just highlight and create it and then just change your titles.